The cruel inheritance, the garage smelled of dust and oil. The dim light from a single bulb swung above, casting uneven shadows on the wooden walls. A woman stood there, her hand gently resting on her pregnant belly. She was tired, not just from the weight of carrying new life, but from the heavy silence of the moment. Across from her, her in-laws watched with folded arms and cold eyes. They had gathered for what they called the reading of inheritance, but it was less about sharing and more about showing power. In the corner of the garage stood a faded yellow Volkswagen Beetle. Its once bright paint was chipped, rust marks spread across its body like scars, and the front bumper hung slightly loose. To anyone else, it looked like an old car ready for scrap. To her in-laws, it was the perfect symbol of what they thought she deserved. The eldest of them, a tall woman with silver hair, pointed a finger at the Beetle. Her voice was sharp, almost like a blade cutting through the silence. "That rusty can is all you get. Nothing else. You should be grateful we even left you this." The others smirked. Some even let out soft laughter. They exchanged glances that said more than words could. To them, she was not worthy of land, houses, or shares in the family company. She was an outsider. Someone who had taken their son and brother away from them. Someone who did not belong to their world of wealth and status. She stood still, her hand tightening over her belly. She wanted to cry, but she refused to show weakness. She knew their game. They wanted to see her broken, to see her beg for more. But she would not. She looked at the car with steady eyes. Perhaps it looked worthless to them, but she felt something stir within her, as if the car carried a quiet dignity they had all failed to notice. "Take the keys and leave," one of them said, throwing the rusted set of keys toward her feet. For a moment she hesitated. Then she bent down, picked up the keys, and held them firmly in her hand. Without another word, she turned and walked out. The laughter of the family echoed behind her, each sound pressing into her heart like a nail. But she kept walking, slow and steady, her unborn child shifting inside her as if sensing her strength. The days that followed were not easy. She drove the Beetle back to her small rented house on the edge of town. Every bump on the road made the car rattle. Every corner revealed another squeak in the old engine. People in the neighborhood noticed her car. Some shook their heads, some whispered, some even laughed openly. To them, she had been cheated. At night, when she parked the car outside, she would sit inside it for a while before going in. She would run her hands over the cracked steering wheel, the worn leather seats, and the faded dashboard. She would close her eyes and breathe in the faint smell of age and dust. Somehow the car gave her comfort. It was not wealth, but it was something real, something left untouched by the cruelty of others. She thought about her late husband often. He had been a kind man, gentle with her, always encouraging her to believe in herself. His loss still felt like a wound that refused to heal, and now, with the child on the way, she felt both weaker and stronger at the same time. She whispered to herself, "This car will take care of us somehow." Her in-laws did not stop their cruelty. Whenever they saw her in town, they would comment loudly, making sure others heard. "Look at her driving that trash heap. She should have sold it already. Imagine being left with that." They laughed, and people around them often joined in, but she kept her head high. She had no reason to be ashamed. Every time she drove that Beetle, she reminded herself it was not the car that defined her, but how she carried herself despite the insults. Her dignity became her shield, her silence, her strength. Weeks turned into months. The car broke down more than once, but she never gave up. She learned to fix small problems on her own, watching old videos, reading manuals, and asking friendly mechanics for advice. Slowly, she grew attached to the Beetle, as if it were not just a machine but a companion on her journey. When her child was born, it was that same Beetle that rushed her to the hospital in the middle of a stormy night. The rain poured heavily, the roads flooded, and visibility was almost zero. Yet the Beetle, with its old engine and stubborn spirit, carried them safely. That night, as she held her baby in her arms, she looked at the car parked outside the hospital window. A quiet smile formed on her lips. Maybe the world saw rust, but she saw resilience. She often remembered that day in the garage. The pointing fingers, the mocking faces, the sharp words meant to humiliate her. But over time, the memory stopped hurting her. Instead, it fueled her. She promised her child that one day they would rise above it all. One day, the same people who laughed at them would stand silent. She did not yet know how or when, but she believed life had a strange way of turning things around. And she believed this old car, this so-called rusty can, was part of that story. Each time she held the steering wheel, she whispered quietly, "We will prove them wrong." And though the night was often dark, though the road was long and uncertain, she believed in something brighter waiting at the end. The laughter of her in-laws no longer haunted her. It challenged her. It became the spark that kept her moving forward step by step, mile by mile, as she built a new life for herself and her child. The days after she received the old Volkswagen Beetle were heavy with humiliation. She could not step outside without feeling the sting of whispers behind her back. The car was not just a vehicle anymore. It had become a symbol of what her in-laws thought of her. Worthless, unwanted, and undeserving of respect. Each time she drove through the market or parked near the shops, eyes turned toward her. People would nudge one another. Some would smile with pity, others with quiet mockery. She heard them murmur, "That is the car they left her with." Imagine that. The laughter of her in-laws had followed her out of the garage that day, but now it seemed the whole town had picked up the tune. Still, she drove the car. She had no choice. She could not afford anything better, and more than that, she felt strangely bound to it. She cleaned it every weekend, carefully washing away the dirt and polishing the rusty metal as though the car's scars were her own. Every time she sat behind the wheel, she reminded herself that this was all she had been given, but she would not throw it away. The Beetle had carried her through rain and sun, and though others called it junk, it never once left her stranded when she needed it most. The humiliation was sharpest when her in-laws crossed her path. They enjoyed reminding her of her place. On Sundays, when she drove past their large house on the hill, they sometimes stood outside sipping tea in the garden, their eyes following the yellow Beetle as it coughed its way up the road. She could almost hear their laughter even when she kept her windows closed. They had mansions, new cars, and business empires. She had only her child and this car, and they wanted her to never forget it. Yet beneath the shame, there was something else growing inside her. It was quiet at first, just a faint spark of defiance. Each insult, each mocking glance added fuel to it. She told herself, "If this car is all they think I deserve, then I will turn it into something they cannot even imagine." She did not know how, but she carried that thought like a secret shield. It kept her from breaking down when the weight of humiliation grew unbearable. There were nights when she cried silently in her small bedroom, her child asleep beside her. She looked at the cracked ceiling, feeling the loneliness press down on her chest. Her husband's absence left a hole no amount of strength could fill, and yet she always rose the next morning, washed her face, dressed her child, and stepped out again with the same dignity she had held in that garage. People could laugh at her, but they could not take away her determination to keep moving. The car became more than just transportation. It became a place where she could think, where she could breathe. After long days at work, she often sat in the driver's seat even after she parked at home. She ran her hand over the wheel, listening to the ticking sound of the cooling engine. It was as if the car was alive, whispering to her, telling her to hold on. Sometimes she spoke back, "They think you are worthless. They think I'm worthless. But we will prove them wrong, won't we?" The empty seats and the silent dashboard never answered, but somehow, she felt understood. People asked her why she did not sell the Beetle and buy something newer. Even a small second-hand car would have spared her some embarrassment. She always shook her head. "No, this one stays with me." They never understood, but she did not care. Deep inside, she felt that the Beetle held a story that had not yet been told, a truth that others were too blind to see. The humiliation, though heavy, began to shape her. It hardened her spirit in a way comfort never could. Every insult taught her to rely on her own strength. Every laugh from her in-laws became a lesson in patience, and every long drive through town with people staring at the rusty can became a test of her resolve. Slowly, she stopped flinching when people pointed. Slowly, she began to smile when they whispered. She understood now that humiliation could either break a person or transform them, and she chose transformation. Her child grew, and with each passing year, she told them stories of courage, not bitterness. She never spoke badly of the in-laws in front of her child. Instead, she said, "They gave us this car, and one day, you will understand why it matters." The child did not know what she meant, but they listened, their small hands tracing the worn leather seats, their laughter filling the car with warmth. The Beetle, once mocked as a burden, became a safe space for both mother and child, a symbol of love stronger than humiliation. There was one evening she would never forget. She was driving back from the market when the Beetle suddenly stalled in the middle of the road. Traffic honked behind her, people shouted, and she felt her cheeks burn with shame. She stepped out, trying to push the car to the side. Just then, a group of young men passing by laughed loudly. "Look at her," one shouted, "still clinging to that trash heap." The others joined in, pointing and mocking. For a moment, she wanted to disappear into the ground. But then something shifted in her. She straightened her back, ignored their laughter, and with all her strength pushed the car alone to the side of the road. She called a mechanic, waited patiently, and when the engine roared back to life, she climbed in, held her head high, and drove on. That night, as she tucked her child into bed, she whispered, "We will never let their words break us." In truth, the humiliation had become her teacher. It reminded her daily of how cruel people could be, but it also reminded her of how powerful it was to rise above cruelty. She learned to carry herself with quiet pride, not the pride of wealth or possessions, but the pride of resilience. She began to understand that sometimes life takes away comfort, only to give you strength in return. And deep down, though she could not yet explain why, she felt the old Beetle was waiting to reveal its secret. She did not know what that secret was, but she believed it was there. Perhaps her late husband had left something for her. Perhaps fate had hidden something in plain sight. The car was more than metal and rust, it was a mystery. And while the world humiliated her for holding on to it, she held on tighter, trusting that one day, the truth would come to light. That night, as she closed her eyes, the sound of her in-laws' laughter echoed faintly in her mind. But for the first time, it did not sting. Instead, it sounded distant, like the fading echo of people who would soon be forgotten. She whispered to herself, "Let them laugh. One day, this car will silence them all." The yellow Beetle had become more than just a car. To anyone passing by, it still looked like a rusty old box on wheels, but to her, it carried something deeper, something she could not fully explain. It was as if the car had grown into a mirror of her life. People looked at it and laughed, but when she looked at it, she saw something that spoke to her spirit. It was flawed, scarred, and weathered, but it kept moving forward. Just like her, the Beetle was there through every small and big moment. It was the car that brought her newborn home from the hospital, the car that carried her to long shifts at work, the car that rattled along the road while her child hummed songs in the back seat. It became their little world, a space where the two of them shared moments no one else could see. When rain poured, they sat inside, listening to the drops tap the roof like a steady rhythm. When the summer heat burned, they rolled down the windows and let the wind rush in, laughing at how their hair whipped around wildly. To her child, it was just a car, but to her, it was a silent witness to every struggle and every small victory. The humiliation from her in-laws never truly faded, but over time, she stopped caring about the whispers in town. Instead, she began to notice how strong she had become. When the car broke down, she fixed what she could. When money was tight, she found ways to keep it running. It was as if the Beetle was training her, teaching her patience and resilience. She remembered one afternoon when the car refused to start outside a grocery store. People looked at her as she stood there, her child holding her hand. For a moment, shame rushed over her again, but then her child looked up and said, "Mama, we can do it. The car always comes back." She smiled, bent down, and kissed their forehead. Together they waited, and soon enough the engine coughed back to life. That small moment filled her with courage. If her child could believe in her, then she could believe in herself. Slowly, the Beetle turned into a kind of symbol in her heart. Every scratch and dent on it reminded her that life leaves marks, but those marks do not take away value. Every squeak in the engine reminded her that strength is not about being perfect, but about not giving up. She began to see beauty in the very things others called ugly. When she polished the car on weekends, neighbors still laughed. One even shouted once, "Why waste time on that pile of rust?" She only smiled and kept wiping the surface with a cloth. To her, she was not polishing rust. She was polishing resilience. Polishing a reminder that she could not be broken. Her child grew older, and often when they sat in the car together, she would tell them stories about it. She never called it junk. Instead, she told them that the car was brave. She said, "This car is like us. People look at it and see nothing, but they do not know its heart. They do not know how strong it really is." The child would laugh and pat the dashboard as if agreeing. their little hands leaving fingerprints on the dusty surface. Those moments stitched her wounds together, giving her strength she had not known she possessed. There were days when she thought about selling it, especially when money was tight. The thought always came when she struggled to pay rent or when she counted coins at the grocery store. Selling the car could have eased some of the burden, but each time the thought crossed her mind, something stopped her. It was not just stubbornness, it was instinct. She felt that letting go of the Beetle would be like letting go of something sacred. It was not just a car. It was a piece of her journey, and journeys are not sold for a handful of money. Then came a moment that changed how she looked at it forever. One night after putting her child to sleep, she stepped outside and sat in the car with the door open. The moonlight fell softly on the hood, making the rust glisten like faint silver patterns. She leaned back against the seat and closed her eyes. For the first time, she spoke aloud words she had kept locked inside. They wanted me to feel small. They wanted me to believe this car is a curse. But this car is not a curse. It is a promise. One day this car will show them who I really am. She did not know why she said it, or where the sudden certainty came from, but the words felt heavy with truth. From that night onward, she no longer felt ashamed of the Beetle. She drove it with pride even when people stared. She stopped hiding from her in-laws' eyes and instead met their gaze when they mocked her. Something about her had changed. The car that was meant to humiliate her had become her crown. She carried it like a badge of survival. Life continued, hard and unforgiving at times, but her faith in herself grew stronger. She taught her child not to bow to mockery, not to fear laughter, but to walk straight even when others wanted you bent. The Beetle had taught her that. It had taught her that resilience is not silent weakness but quiet power. She did not yet know what was hidden inside the car, nor did she imagine the fortune it carried in its history. But she believed now that there was a reason it had come into her life. It was not an accident. It was not just the leftover scraps her in-laws thought they had thrown at her. It was something else, something unseen, something waiting. The Beetle, once a symbol of humiliation, was now a symbol of her spirit. Others still called it junk, but to her it was proof that dignity could grow even in the hardest soil. And though she could not see the future clearly, she knew in her heart that one day this car would reveal its true purpose. One day the same people who mocked her would understand. As she sat in the driver's seat one evening, the fading sun painting the world in gold, she whispered to the car, "You and I, we are the same. They do not see us now, but they will." And with that she turned the key. The old engine roared stubbornly to life, and together they drove forward into the unknown road of tomorrow. It was on a quiet afternoon that everything began to shift. The day had been ordinary, filled with the usual routine of work, errands, and the endless task of caring for her child. The sun was beginning to sink behind the houses, painting the sky with soft orange light, when she decided to clean the Beetle once more. It had become a habit for her, almost like therapy. Whenever life felt heavy, she took a bucket of water, a rag, and spent hours gently wiping the dust and dirt away, as if polishing her own wounds in the process. That day, she focused on the inside. She pulled out the mats, scrubbed the dashboard, and carefully wiped the seats. Her child played nearby, laughing as they hopped from one stepping stone to another. The soft sound of their giggles kept her heart warm, even as the memories of her in-laws' cruel words echoed in her mind. "That rusty can is all you deserve." She had carried those words for months now, but she no longer allowed them to poison her. Instead, she had transformed them into a promise. She would not stay broken. She reached for the glove compartment, which she had opened many times before. Usually it was filled with nothing but scraps of paper, an old flashlight, and a few receipts. But that evening, when her fingers brushed against the back panel, she felt something odd. It was not the smooth plastic she was used to. Her fingertips found a tiny edge, almost like a flap, and curiosity sparked in her chest. She pressed harder, and to her surprise, a hidden compartment popped open with a faint click. Inside there was an envelope. It was old, yellowed with time, the edges slightly curled. Her heart skipped a beat. She picked it up carefully, her hands trembling as if she were holding something sacred. For a moment she simply stared at it, unable to move. The handwriting on the front was faded but clear enough to read. It was her late father-in-law's writing. She recognized it immediately, though she had not seen it in years. Her breath caught in her throat. Why would he leave something hidden in this car? She sat in the driver's seat, the envelope resting on her lap. For a long time, she hesitated. A storm of emotions rushed through her: fear, hope, confusion. She closed her eyes, whispering a prayer before she finally tore the envelope open. Inside was a small key, old and metallic, heavy in her hand. Along with it was a folded piece of paper. She unfolded it slowly, her eyes scanning the neat but shaky handwriting. True value is never where eyes first look. This car guards what pride blinded others from seeing. Follow the map. Trust your heart. Her heart pounded as she looked closer. Attached to the note was a hand-drawn map, carefully detailed. It showed roads leading out of town, curving through the countryside toward a small dot marked with a circle. The place seemed to be an abandoned property, somewhere she vaguely remembered hearing about. She sat there, frozen in disbelief. All this time, while she had been laughed at, mocked, and shamed, this car had carried a secret. Her father-in-law, the man who had built the family fortune, had chosen her to hide something for. Not his children who had mocked her, not the relatives who had looked down on her, but her. The thought sent chills down her spine. Why her? What did he see in her that others could not? Her child climbed into the passenger seat, curious about what she was holding. She smiled gently, hiding the letter for the moment. "It is just something important," she said softly. She did not want to burden them yet with the weight of what she had discovered. But in her heart she knew this was no small matter. This was the beginning of something larger than she had ever imagined. That night she lay awake, staring at the ceiling, the key and letter resting on her bedside table. Questions swirled in her mind. What was hidden at that place? Why had it been left for her to find? And why through this car the very thing used to humiliate her? She thought about her father-in-law, a man she had always found stern but strangely thoughtful. Perhaps he had seen the cruelty in his own family. Perhaps he had known that wealth would corrupt them, and he wanted something different for her. The more she thought about it, the more she felt that this was not just coincidence. It was destiny. The next morning she drove her child to school, but her mind was far away. Every turn of the wheel reminded her of the secret hidden within the car. The Beetle was no longer just a symbol of her resilience. It was a guardian, holding a path to something she had yet to discover. She touched the glove compartment as she drove, almost as if thanking it for keeping its secret safe for so long. After dropping her child off, she took a deep breath and made a decision. She would follow the map. She did not know what she would find, but she could not ignore the letter. She packed some water, food, and a blanket in the Beetle that evening, preparing for the journey. As she slid the key into the ignition, she whispered, "Let us see where this road takes us." The engine sputtered, then roared to life. For once she did not care about the stares or the laughter of neighbors. She was no longer just a woman driving an old car. She was a woman carrying a secret that could change everything. The humiliation that had once weighed her down felt lighter now. In its place grew a sense of purpose, a spark of excitement. As the car rolled forward, the letter echoed in her mind. True value is never where eyes first look. She finally understood. The car was never worthless. It had always been the key, not the curse. She did not yet know the size of what awaited her, but she knew one thing clearly. Her life was about to change forever. And this time it would not be her in-laws laughing. It would be destiny itself revealing its hidden smile. The map stayed on her bedside table for several days, and though she looked at it each night, she hesitated to act. The weight of it was almost too much to carry. What if it led to nothing? What if her in-laws found out and tried to take whatever was hidden for themselves? And yet a stronger thought rose each time doubt came. What if this was the turning point her life had been waiting for? One morning, with the sun rising slowly behind the rooftops, she made her decision. She packed a small bag with food, water, a flashlight, and a notebook. She tucked the letter and the key into her pocket. Her child, still too young to understand the significance of this journey, sat in the back seat, happily humming while clutching their toy. She smiled at the sound. If she was going to discover the truth, she wanted her child by her side. After all, everything she did was for them. The Beetle rumbled to life as if it too understood the importance of the day. She followed the map's directions out of town, driving past fields, narrow roads, and eventually into the countryside. With each passing mile, her heart pounded louder. The sun climbed higher. casting golden light on the road, and the air smelled of earth and grass. It felt as though life itself was guiding her to something extraordinary. After nearly 2 hours, she reached the place marked on the map. It was an old storage facility, long abandoned, surrounded by tall grass and rusted fences. From the outside, it looked like nothing more than a forgotten ruin, another relic of time. She parked the Beetle near the entrance, her hands shaking as she turned off the engine. For a long moment, she sat in silence, staring at the building. Her child looked at her curiously. "Mama, what is this place?" She took a deep breath, forcing a smile. "It is a place we are meant to see." They walked toward the entrance, the crunch of gravel beneath their shoes breaking the heavy silence. The lock on the main gate was rusted, but when she pulled the small key from her pocket and tried it, it slid in perfectly. With a twist, the lock snapped open. Her heart raced. The map had not been a trick. This was real. Inside, the air was cool and smelled faintly of metal and dust. Sunlight filtered through cracks in the walls, casting long shadows across the floor. They walked slowly, her child holding tightly onto her hand. Rows of old crates and covered objects filled the space like ghosts of a forgotten past. For a moment, she wondered if she was dreaming. Her eyes scanned the space until they landed on a large steel cabinet at the far end of the room. Something about it pulled her closer. She approached cautiously, her footsteps echoing in the silence. The cabinet was locked, but the same key that had opened the gate fit into the handle. With trembling hands, she turned it. The lock clicked, and the heavy door creaked open. What she saw inside left her breathless. Neatly arranged folders, documents, and sealed envelopes filled the shelves. She pulled one out, her hands shaking. Inside were ownership papers, stock certificates, and legal deeds. She scanned the names and signatures, her eyes widening. These were not just any papers. They represented rights to land and shares in a mining company her father-in-law had invested in decades earlier. Back then, perhaps the value had been modest, forgotten, or overlooked. But now, as she read the dates and compared the names, the truth struck her like lightning. The mining company was still alive, and its worth had grown unimaginably over the years. Her breath caught. She pulled out more documents, flipping through them quickly. The evidence was overwhelming. The value of what she was holding was no small inheritance. It was a fortune. She leaned against the cabinet for support, her knees trembling beneath her. Her child looked up at her innocently. "What is it, Mama?" She smiled through her tears, bending down to hold them close. "It is something that will change our lives forever." She packed as many documents as she could into her bag, carefully folding them and tucking them away. She locked the cabinet again, hiding the rest, for she knew she could not carry everything at once. She would come back later when she was ready. For now, what she had was enough to prove the truth. Driving back, she could hardly focus on the road. Her mind was racing. She thought of all the nights she had cried, of all the days she had endured humiliation, of every cruel laugh her in-laws had thrown at her. All this time, the very car they had mocked had been holding the path to a treasure they had overlooked. She felt both triumphant and humbled. It was not just about money. It was about justice. When she reached home, she spent the night studying the papers carefully. She researched the company, its growth, its assets. Her eyes filled with tears as she read the figures. The shares her father-in-law had hidden were worth nearly $450 million. She whispered the number aloud in disbelief, almost afraid to believe it was real. She remembered her father-in-law, the man who had always watched her quietly even when others mocked. Perhaps he had seen her strength. Perhaps he had known that she, unlike his other children, would value the legacy and not waste it. He had hidden the truth where only someone with patience and resilience would find it, in the car they had dismissed as worthless. The weight of the discovery sank into her chest. She was no longer the woman humiliated by an old car. She was now the guardian of a fortune that could rewrite not only her life but her child's future as well. The humiliation had been replaced by triumph, and yet she felt no desire for revenge. She thought of her in-laws and their cruel laughter, but instead of anger, she felt a quiet satisfaction. Fate had chosen her. Life had hidden treasure in the very place they had mocked, and now it was hers. She did not need to shout or boast. The truth itself was enough. She tucked her child into bed that night, brushing their hair gently, and whispered, "Our lives are about to change." Her child, too young to understand, only smiled sleepily. But she knew one day they would understand. and when they did, they would carry the same dignity she had fought for. The beetle sat outside, silent and still. But she looked at it differently now. No longer was it just a symbol of resilience. It was a guardian of destiny, the key to everything her future held. She touched the steering wheel one last time before going to bed, whispering, "You were never worthless. You were the greatest gift of all." That night she dreamed of roads stretching endlessly before her, wide and golden, waiting for her to travel them. The humiliation was gone. The discovery had given her something stronger than wealth. It had given her the power to rise. The news of her discovery did not spread immediately. For a while it was a secret she held close to her heart, a treasure too heavy to share with anyone. Each morning she woke up and looked at the documents stacked neatly on her small table, and a quiet smile would spread across her face. She had not just found money, she had found justice, a kind of justice that did not need noise or anger to prove itself. All those years of humiliation, the laughter that had followed her every step, the cruel voices that told her she was nothing, all of them were now powerless against the truth she held in her hands. Still, she moved carefully. She sought the advice of professionals, people who could confirm what she already knew but did not dare fully believe. She walked into offices where lawyers and financial advisors studied the papers with wide eyes, their voices hushed with awe. One of them finally looked up at her and said, "Do you realize what you have here? These holdings are worth hundreds of millions." "This is life-changing," she nodded silently. Life-changing. It was the only word that seemed to fit. Yet even as the weight of wealth settled over her, she felt something remarkable. She was calm. She was not consumed by greed or blinded by the size of the fortune. The years of struggle had shaped her differently. Money could change her circumstances, but it would not change who she was. She had learned too much from humiliation to be arrogant now. Her child noticed the difference first. "Mama, you look happy these days," they said one evening as they sat together in the Beetle eating ice cream with the windows rolled down. She looked at her child's innocent face and smiled softly. "Yes, my love. I am happy because we will not have to struggle so much anymore." The child tilted their head, curious, but she only kissed their forehead. In time, they would understand. For now it was enough that the burden of worry was lifting from her shoulders. It was only when her in-laws learned of the discovery that the real triumph began. Word reached them through whispers in the community, through financial records that surfaced once the holdings were officially transferred into her name. The very family that had mocked her now found themselves in disbelief. They had thought they had given her nothing, that they had stripped her of dignity by leaving her only an old car. But the car had held the key to everything they had overlooked. When they saw her again, the arrogance in their faces was gone. For the first time, they did not laugh. They stared in silence, their eyes wide, their mouths struggling to form words. She did not boast, she did not gloat. She simply carried herself with the same dignity she had always carried. That was her victory, the fact that she did not need to lower herself to their cruelty. Her silence was louder than any insult she could have thrown back at them. She remembered every moment of humiliation they had forced on her. She remembered the day in the garage, the way they had pointed to the Beetle with mocking smiles. Now when she drove past them in that same car, restored and gleaming, she felt no bitterness. The laughter that had once crushed her had become the foundation of her triumph. She understood something powerful now. True strength is not in revenge, but in rising so high that revenge becomes unnecessary. The Beetle became a symbol of her victory. People in town no longer whispered insults when they saw it. Instead, they spoke with admiration. The story spread like wildfire. A woman once mocked for her rusty can had discovered a fortune hidden inside it. The very car that had been used to humiliate her was now celebrated as a legend. She restored it carefully, giving it new paint, repairing every part not to erase its past but to honor it. When people saw it, they no longer saw rust. They saw resilience, patience, and a miracle of fate. Her triumph was not only in wealth but in how she chose to use it. She could have isolated herself, built walls of luxury, and ignored the world that had once turned its back on her, but she did not. She used the fortune to build a better life for her child, yes, but also to lift others who were where she had once been. She supported schools, hospitals, and shelters for women who were abandoned, mocked, or left with nothing. She became a quiet force of change, proving that wealth, when guided by dignity, could heal wounds far beyond her own. Her child grew up seeing all of this, learning not just from her words but from her actions. They saw that their mother had been mocked, yet she had endured. They saw that she had been left with nothing, yet she had turned it into everything. They carried her lessons in their heart. That dignity is greater than wealth, that patience carries its own reward, and that humiliation can be turned into power if you refuse to bow to it. The in-laws, once so proud, now lived with the silent sting of their mistake. They had laughed when they gave her the car, but fate had laughed last. She never mocked them in return. She never reminded them of their cruelty. Her triumph was greater than words. It was in her quiet grace, in the way she carried herself without the need for revenge. They could no longer laugh at her because their laughter had been silenced by truth itself. There were days when she sat alone in the Beetle, thinking about her late father-in-law. She wondered if he had known this day would come, if he had chosen her because he saw in her what no one else could. Perhaps he had recognized her strength, her patience, and her heart. Perhaps he had trusted her to protect what others would only destroy. Whatever his reasons, she was grateful. The car he left her had not only carried her through hard times, it had carried her into her destiny. Triumph, she realized, was not about proving others wrong. It was about proving yourself right, about holding on to dignity even when the world tries to strip it away. She had done that, and now her life was the proof. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, she drove the Beetle down the same road she had traveled so many times before. Her child sat beside her, taller now, older, their eyes shining with admiration. "Mama," they said softly, "I think this car is magic." She laughed gently, her hands steady on the wheel. "It is not magic, my love, it is life, and life hides its treasures where others cannot see them." The road stretched out before them, endless and golden. The car hummed with steady strength, carrying them forward as it always had. Her triumph was not just behind her, it was in every mile ahead, every dream yet to be lived, every lesson her story would teach. And as the evening breeze rushed in through the windows, she knew one thing for certain: she had turned humiliation into honor and pain into power. The years passed, and with them came changes so profound that even she sometimes struggled to believe her own story. The woman who had once been mocked for driving an old rusted car now lived with the weight of a legacy far greater than money. Her life was no longer defined by humiliation, but by the quiet strength with which she had transformed it into something extraordinary. The Beetle still sat outside her home, no longer a broken machine, but a carefully restored reminder of how fate had chosen her path. Its bright yellow paint gleamed in the sunlight, polished until it shone like gold. To the world, it was no longer just a car. It was a story, a symbol, a legend whispered from one generation to the next. Her fortune had opened doors she never thought she would walk through. She had the means to build a new house, large enough to give her child comfort and safety, but never so grand that it separated them from the life they had once lived. She refused to forget her beginnings. She refused to forget the lonely nights, the whispers in the marketplace, and the mocking eyes of her in-laws. Those memories, once painful, had become her compass. They guided her choices. They reminded her that wealth without humility was emptiness. So instead of losing herself in luxury, she chose to build. She built schools in her town, places where children who had once been ignored could now learn and dream. She funded hospitals where mothers like her, once desperate and alone, could find care and dignity. She created programs that gave women the tools to rise from hardship, teaching them skills, providing them with work, and showing them that their worth was never defined by what others chose to give or take away. Her name became known not as a woman of fortune but as a woman of purpose. People no longer whispered about her humiliation. They spoke with reverence about her kindness, her strength, and her generosity. Her child grew into adulthood watching this transformation. They carried her lessons with pride, understanding that their life was not built on wealth alone but on the courage of their mother, who had endured everything and still chosen to rise. They often told others, "My mother taught me that pain can be turned into strength if you refuse to give up." They looked at the Beetle with the same awe she had once felt, touching its steering wheel with a kind of reverence. For them, it was not just a car. It was their history, their inheritance, and their proof that miracles can be hidden in the unlikeliest places. As for her in-laws, time had a way of silencing their laughter. They no longer mocked her when they saw her. Instead, they lowered their eyes, the memory of their cruelty haunting them. They had given her what they thought was a curse, and it had turned into a blessing greater than anything they had ever known. Some tried to reconcile, to soften their voices and seek her favor, but she did not hold grudges. She greeted them with the same calm dignity she had always shown. Her victory had never been about revenge. It was about proving that dignity could survive even in the harshest storms. The story of the Beetle spread far beyond her town. Newspapers wrote about it. People traveled to see the car, to stand in front of it and take pictures, to tell their children the tale of the woman who had turned humiliation into triumph. The car was placed in a museum for a time, with a plaque that read, "The car that carried hope." Visitors from all over came to read about her journey, and many left inspired, whispering to themselves that they too could rise from whatever burdens life had placed upon them. Yet she always made sure the car returned home to her, because to her it was not a relic for strangers. It was family. It had been her companion in the darkest days, and she would never let it go. In her quiet moments, she would often sit in the Beetle, close her eyes, and remember. She remembered the night she had discovered the letter, the drive to the old storage facility, the trembling in her hands as she realized the truth. She remembered the long years of humiliation, the cruel laughter that once echoed in her ears, and how it all disappeared the moment fate revealed its secret. She smiled to herself, knowing that life had not been cruel after all. It had been preparing her. It had been shaping her into someone strong enough to carry such a destiny. Her legacy was not just in the wealth she passed down to her child, but in the lessons she left behind. She left behind the truth that value is not always seen at first glance, that the things people dismiss, laugh at, or call worthless can often hold the greatest treasures. That dignity is worth more than gold. That silence can sometimes be the loudest answer. And that strength does not come from never being broken, but from rising each time life tries to break you. In the later years of her life, she became a figure people turned to for wisdom. Young women came to her, telling her their struggles, their humiliations, their fears. She listened, her voice calm, her words gentle. She told them her story, not with pride but with humility, as if she were only the messenger of a greater lesson. "Do not be afraid of laughter," she would say. "Do not be afraid of what people call worthless. Sometimes that is where life hides its greatest gifts." Her child carried the story forward, writing it down, sharing it with friends, and eventually telling it to their own children. They made sure the tale of the Beetle was never forgotten, and so it became more than just a family story. It became a parable, told in classrooms, in churches, in homes, a story of hope passed down like an inheritance far greater than any fortune. The Beetle, that old car once left as an insult, lived on long after its wheels stopped turning. It lived on in the hearts of those who heard its story, in the lives of those inspired to rise above humiliation, in the countless people who saw themselves in the woman who refused to break. When she finally left this world, people gathered not to mourn but to honor her. They spoke of her strength, her grace, her kindness. And as her child stood before the crowd, they pointed to the Beetle park nearby, gleaming in the sunlight, and said, "This was my mother's car. The car that everyone laughed at. The car that carried our future. The car that proved dignity cannot be stolen." The crowd grew silent, many with tears in their eyes. The Beetle stood there like a monument, silent but powerful, carrying not just one woman's story but the hopes of many. It had been the beginning of her humiliation, but in the end it became the crown of her triumph. Her legacy was clear. She had shown the world that true wealth is not measured only in money but in the courage to endure, in the dignity to rise, and in the wisdom to use blessings to lift others. The $450 million had changed her life, but the greater treasure was the story she left behind. A story that turned laughter into silence, pain into power, and an old car into a timeless symbol of hope. And so, her story lived on, whispered from generation to generation, long after her name had faded into history, because the world never forgot the lesson of the Beetle, the lesson that what seems worthless in the eyes of others can hold the power to change everything.